I sure hope you're curled up on the couch right now watching a good horror film, because the only thing scary coming out of the Nintendo Switch Online this week is the lack of announcements. The good news is there are still a lot of 8 and 16-bit games that haven't been given the review crew treatment. Today we're going to go back and cover 3 Super NES classics, including Super Valis IV, Breath of Fire, and one of my favorites, Demon's Crest. Oh sure, all 3 of these games hit Nintendo's subscription service years ago, but I'm still obligated to ask, are they actually worth playing? To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, Die Hard Game Fan, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. So go and grab something fire retardant, because this is going to be another hot episode of Nintendo Switch Online Review Crew.
Okay, class, pop quiz. Question number 1. You want to buy a video game system. Super NES gives you 4 free games. Sega gives you no free games. Which do you choose? Number 2. Farmer Brown has 4 chickens to trade for a video game system. Super NES gives him 4 free games. Sega, no free games. Which should Farmer Brown choose? Number 3.
Buy any Super NES system and for $3.50 postage, we'll send you Super Mario All-Stars. That's 4 games free. Now who would miss an offer like that?
Could you repeat the question?
With designs from iconic developer KJ Inafune and an epic fantasy storyline, you would think that Breath of Fire would be a slam dunk on the Super Nintendo. Well, Capcom wasn't so sure, opting instead to let Squaresoft take over publishing duties in the United States. Perhaps that was a wise decision, as Square's name likely added a level of credibility to the game. Well, with this coming hot off the heels of the critically acclaimed release of Final Fantasy VI, and at the time as Final Fantasy III. The gamble paid off, leading to 4 more installments released over the next decade, as well as a much maligned 6th game that was released in 2016. But instead of talking about that game, let's go ahead and see what the critics said about the OG Breath of Fire from 1994. Of all the magazines on the market, it was Die Hard Game Fan who was the most excited to review Breath of Fire. Skid raved that it's been a long time since I played an American RPG of this quality. This is a first-rate RPG that competes on the highest level. This game, plus Final Fantasy III in their 94 lineup, Square is giving players one of the best RPG years in gaming history. The Inquirer also liked the game, concluding that RPGs don't get much better than this on 16-bit. Breath of Fire has beautiful artwork, a great story, very good fight scenes, and some of the most amazing music I've ever heard from Square. The adventure is 50 hours long, so park it, take your time, and have fun. Die Hard Game Fan gave Breath of Fire an average score of 91%. Now, that is a bit higher than the general consensus. For example, you saw Game Players magazine go as high as an 87%, while Super Play could only muster an 80%. And that's right in line with the 8 out of 10 average that you saw over at Electronic Gaming Monthly, who gave the game this capsule review. The folks at Square know a good game when they see it. They did RPG fans a great favor by buying this game from Capcom in Japan and bringing it to the States. Even if you're not a big fan of these kinds of more deliberately paced strategy games, you'll still get hooked on this one. Excellent graphics and sound make this a winner. On the other hand, Nintendo Power wasn't quite as impressed with Breath of Fire, giving it a slightly lower 3.8 out of 5. However, if you're looking for the lowest score, then you're gonna find it in a real unlikely place. That's right, the usually hyperbolic GamePro gave this RPG classic a score of 3 out of 5. After describing the game, they concluded that if all this sounds somewhat bland, it's because you've seen such elements in these pages before. Even the storyline is nondescript and average. If Breath of Fire wanted to make a name for itself, it should have tried more interesting enemies, different battle screens, and butt-kicking graphics. Instead, what we get is something vaguely familiar, a forgettable game with barely enough breath to last. GamePro was definitely the odd one out when it came to this game, but don't worry, they'll have plenty of time to redeem themselves later in this episode. Without any of the Final Fantasy games on the Nintendo Switch Online service, this really is your next best bet, so definitely give Breath of Fire a try. I promise you won't get burned. Having already wrapped up the Yuko trilogy with Valis III, what do you do next? Well, if you're Telenet Japan, you simply invent a bunch of new characters and keep the series going, no matter if there was a natural conclusion or not. Valis IV was originally released on the PC Engine back in 1991, but it would take another 2 years for the game to come to America and earn the Super in its title. Now, much like the Genesis ports of the original trilogy, the Super NES game kept a lot of the cinemas, but had to go without the dramatic voice acting. Yeah, that's disappointing, but is it really the game's biggest problem? Not according to these reviews. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave Super Valis IV an average score of 7 out of 10, which involved every single critic giving the game the same so-so score. Steve argued that the latest in the Valis series does a decent job of carrying the theme over to the Super NES. Although the graphics are pretty good and the sound support done well, the action is very slow in the early rounds with next to no challenge except for the bosses. Once the game gets going, however, the payoff is pretty good. Resident Fake Ninja Sushi X also gave the game a 7, but was much more down on the sequel. Super Valis is not my idea of a smooth Super NES title. The overall choppiness of this game really disappointed me, but I suppose the next sequel will have this problem ironed out. The still graphics are cool, with very little breakup between frames. I'd like to see this on the Super NES CD, if it ever shows up. For the most part, the critics at the time agreed with EGM. Die-hard game fans critics were disappointed after Valis III, giving the Super NES sequel an average score of 70%. That's basically where video games and computer entertainment landed, as they gave it a 7.2. However, if you're looking for the absolute highest score that anybody could possibly give Super Valis IV, then we need to go ahead and check in with GamePro, who gave it a perfect score of 5 out of 5. They liked the crisp gameplay and the smooth handling, concluding that the heroine's name changed, but the game remains essentially the same. There's never a dull moment in this cart. Super Valis IV is sharp. Look, for as much as I enjoy the Valis series, I have always felt that Super Valis IV was a bit unnecessary after everything wrapped up with the Yuko trilogy. What this series needed was a big overhaul, but instead what they ended up doing was going the erotic visual novel route, pretty much destroying any hopes for Valis to ever make a comeback. Sure, Super Valis IV is fun, but there are definitely better action games on the Nintendo Switch Online service. Having already conquered both the Game Boy and the Nintendo Entertainment System, it only makes sense that Firebrand's next stop would be the Super Nintendo. Demon's Crest is the much-hyped yet criminally forgotten spin-off of the Ghouls and Ghosts series. This gave Capcom the ability to create an even bigger, better-looking, and more ambitious action game, one that was filled with scary locations and even spookier bosses. To this day, Demon's Crest remains one of my favorite Super NES games of all time. But look, you're not here for my opinion. Here's what the critics said back in 1994. If we're going to talk about Demon's Crest, then we should probably start with the game's biggest cheerleaders, and that's Die Hard Game Fan. They gave the sequel a near-perfect average of 97%, with Skid arguing that not since Ghouls and Ghosts have I played a Capcom action game this good. Demon's Crest takes my all-time favorite Game Boy game and kicks butt with it, Super NES style. I'm so happy Nintendo let Capcom keep it gory. Mr. Goo agreed, giving it an even higher score. Oh yes! Thank God for Play It Loud. Here's a game that simply would not have happened a year ago. What gore! What violence! What rotting bodies! On top of this, you have frighteningly awesome control, perfect graphics and music, and all-round Capcom quality. While Game Fan may have been the most enthusiastic, they were far from the only outlet giving the game a high score. You saw it snag a phenomenal 4.5 out of 5 from GamePro, as well as an impressive 89% over at Game Players. Electronic Gaming Monthly also loved the game, but Ed had a big question on his mind. Capcom's not hyping this one. What's up with that? Demon's Crest will prove to be a good game for Capcom for many reasons. It has some of the most detailed graphics seen in any action game, plus Demon's Crest has a bit of an RPG quest flair for those looking for more than just a boring old side-scroller. The mysterious nature of the game really draws you closer to the action, and those bosses are huge! Martin liked the game even more, giving it a 9 and raving that Capcom has delivered the goods with Demon's Crest. And I don't think I have to go over how great the graphics are, or how the background music and sound effects are super cool. And what about the awesome gameplay? We've come to expect all that from Capcom. What I didn't expect was how big this game is. I love the fact that there are multiple endings. EGM gave Demon's Crest an average score of 8.25 out of 10. Now that score ends up lining up with a lot of other magazines. Superplay gave this action game an 80% in their 27th issue, while Video Games Magazine gave it an 8 out of 10. You did see Nintendo Power go a little bit lower, giving it a 3.7 out of 5, but the lowest score came from the notoriously grumpy Next Generation. The action in Demon's Crest is much the same as it was in the earlier games, with lots more hidden rooms, items, and weapons to find. The new map mode is also a nice touch, giving you a demon's eye view of the countryside. Unfortunately, the game's way too short. You don't even need most of the hidden stuff to beat it. Once again, we're at a crossroads where some critics are saying that it's surprisingly long, while others are complaining that it's way too short. Yeah, it was hard to be a 16-bit side-scroller in 1995. Short or not, Demon's Crest is worth playing. EGM and GameFan weren't lying when they raved about the stylish graphics, and I'd argue that they hold up remarkably well. This is easily one of my favorite games on the Nintendo Switch Online service, and you don't even need the expansion pack to play it. Hey, thanks for watching us break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes every time Nintendo adds classic games to their subscription service. We have a whole playlist full of dozens of episodes covering literally hundreds of games. So, go and give that a binge when you have a chance. Now, here's the question I have for you. Which series deserves a comeback? Gargoyles Quest, Valis, or Breath of Fire? These are three very different franchises, and I think all of them have pros and cons. Of course, I think that you know that I want to pick Firebrand every single time, but how cool would it be to get a new Valis game? Let me see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we'll be back this weekend with a new feature looking at retro news, plus a haunted house review coming early next week. If that sounds good to you, then I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then,